Hello, and welcome to this latest episode of the Yoga, Bellies and Babies podcast. I'm your host, Krishna Hassomal, and I'm thrilled you're joining us today for this brand new episode, which I really think is so special, with Katie Mellor. So I sat down with Katie, who is a brand new teacher at the Krish Yoga online studio, by the way. She teaches prenatal and postnatal yoga, and she helps women navigate pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum journey with calm confidence. Katie is passionate about creating women-centered classes that provide mothers-to-be and new mothers with a sense of being held, nurtured, and valued, because a woman is just as important as her baby. In this conversation, Katie shares her powerful personal story of preparing for a home birth, only to discover her baby would need immediate surgery after delivery. We explore how this experience completely transformed her approach to teaching yoga and supporting women through all types of births and all types of journeys, from home births to highly medical births. We dive deep into what it truly means to get out of your head and into your body during birth. We discuss the challenges of navigating a medicalized birth while staying connected to your body's wisdom. And we explore Katie's 3-month NICU journey with her son, Benjamin. This episode is filled with insights about birth preparation, the importance of identifying your non-negotiables in your birth plan, and how to maintain a positive mindset even when the birth doesn't go as planned. So whether you're preparing for birth, navigating early motherhood, or supporting women on this journey, I know you'll find value in Katie's wisdom and experiences. And before we begin, I want to take a moment to ask you for your support. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, please consider hitting subscribe, leaving a review, or sharing it with any friends who you think might benefit. Your engagement truly helps me continue bringing these important conversations and allows me to reach more parents who could really use the support. So each review helps this podcast reach more women who might need to hear exactly what we're discussing today. Now, let's dive into my conversation with Katie Mellor, where we explore that magical intersection of yoga philosophy, birth, and the beautiful unpredictability of motherhood. Hi, Katie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to hear your story. Before we get into your story, you could tell our audience, what is it that you do and how is it that you help people?
Absolutely. So I'm Katie. I am a pregnancy and postnatal yoga teacher. And I am really passionate about working with women as they prepare for childbirth and for motherhood, and then into motherhood as well. I think it's a really important time in women's lives, and I think it's completely underestimated within our society. So I love to work with women in that time of their life, help them prepare for birth with calm confidence, and then support them through early motherhood as well.
Yeah, I've seen your website and you do some really amazing things. And one of the things that struck me is that you said, and I've written it down, you were comparing yoga and childbirth. And the first thing it says in big, it's about, yoga is about getting out of your head and into your body. And you were comparing it to childbirth. And my first question was like, how do you actually do that? So I know that's our job as yoga teachers, but as people say, oh, get out of your head, get into your body. So can we start by that? How do women get out of their heads and into their bodies during pregnancy?
It's such a good question. And I think when we start to understand a little bit about the physiology of birth, we realize that it's a function of the body that we actually can't consciously control. It happens without us thinking about it. And quite often, actually, us thinking about it and trying to control it can actually get in the way and slow things down and cause complications. And actually, true physiology, if we take it right back to thinking of ourselves as animals, and maybe we're, giving birth in a cave, we are completely surrendering to our body. We're allowing our body to take over. And actually, in our bodies, the limbic system takes over and the mind actually starts to dampen down. So it allows the body to do its job and get the baby out safely. So I think when we think about true physiology, it is about surrendering to our body and letting our body take over. We talk about using the asana to help us get into our body and out of our head. I just like to draw that comparison. It's challenging because in our society and in our modern culture, true physiology when it comes to childbirth doesn't often happen. And so there's lots of other things that we can do in pregnancy to prepare for all eventualities and all types of birth. What I'm referring to on the website and that sort of quote is true physiology. I think it's really important that as birth workers, we actually understand what true physiology looks like, even if it's difficult to achieve that in our modern day society.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it's challenging during childbirth, but I feel like it's challenging on a day-to-day to listen to your true physiology. I mean, simple things like I'm tired, I need to sleep, but maybe you can't sleep either because you don't think you deserve the rest right now because it's, 11 o'clock in the morning, or because you can't, because you're at work, or because you're with your child, or whatever reason. Then that's the first step of us not being able to follow what our physiology is telling us. And then I feel like somehow we just kind of stop listening to it, right?
Completely. So true. We grow up being taught that ignoring our body signals is a sign of strength and it's the right thing to do. And it's incredibly hard to unlearn those things later on in life. And so when it comes to pregnancy, when we have all of these preconceptions about what pregnancy and birth and mothering, to be honest, should look like, when someone starts to challenge that, maybe in an antenatal class or maybe just a conversation you're having with someone, it takes a lot of effort to change your perspective, and it's not just going to happen in one conversation or one antenatal class that you do online. There's a lot of unlearning to do, and actually pregnancy is not a very long period of time to do that. It's quite tricky to think how we can truly support women to ask these questions of themselves, but in a way that is really supportive and isn't scaring them or isn't dropping all these bombshells and then giving them a really short amount of time to get their head around it and figure out how they feel about it. I know I've changed my approach and kind of philosophy around birth and motherhood significantly over the past few years, mainly due to personal experiences and seeing things in a different way. But I think we've got a huge responsibility as birth workers, as yoga teachers, antenatal educators, whatever you want to call it, to understand that it's a big thing that we're asking of women and what's the most appropriate way to support them.
You did say pregnancy is a relatively short amount of time, but in that relatively short amount of time, we're actually on leave for even shorter amount of time. Most pregnant women are still working for the first 6, 7, 8 months. So we're asking them to drop into this pregnancy mode, get into the physiology, whilst at the same time do their day-to-day, which stops them from doing that. So that kind of creates a contradiction. Like we should be trusting our body and go for this natural pregnancy and natural birth and all of that. What happens when it's not 100% natural? And I'm saying it here in speech marks, and I mean it in the best way, right? When we can't, for whatever reason, there's a complication or we've needed assistance to either get pregnant, support our pregnancy for the birth. How does that work? How do we listen to their physiology then when we're labeled as high risk, for example? I think you have been labeled as high risk. I have been labeled as high risk with twin pregnancy. Can we talk about that? What happens when it's not, exactly the way nature intended? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, completely. So my first birth was pretty much a textbook physiological birth. I did give birth in a birth centre, which in the UK is a midwife-led unit. So it's as close to a home birth as you can get away from home. There was no intervention, no pain relief. Everything just happened without anyone having to think about it. It was very hands-off. No one was touching me. It was just natural in inverted commas. I had this experience and it was incredible, and it was the best thing that had ever happened to me. And I had this euphoric feeling of, well, I'd never felt anything like it before. I absolutely loved the experience. And that's what sparked my passion for this whole world, and what sparked me. It pushed me to do my yoga teacher training, which I'd wanted to do for a long time, but it was the thing that kind of encouraged me to do it. And so I just felt like, oh my goodness, all these women are missing out on this experience. I want to help them have the same experience as me. And even saying it out loud now, it just sounds so naive. Because my second birth was completely different, because at 34 weeks, I was given a suspected diagnosis that my baby would need surgery immediately after birth. So all of my plans, I wanted a home birth. So all of that just went out of the window, and I got transferred to a large tertiary hospital far away from home. And I was going to have to give birth in a highly medicalized environment. And immediately I knew that that was going to affect the way that the birth went. So once I'd got over the initial I was absolutely devastated because I was worried about my baby and what was going to happen. And I started to think about how I could optimize physiology in that environment to give myself the best chance of having the birth that I wanted. So I kind of looked back at my birth plan and looked at what my priorities were and tried to think about how I could still achieve those things. One of the things that I wanted was to go into labour spontaneously. I didn't want to be induced. And there was a long negotiation with the consultant about that. They wanted to induce me. There was no maneuver on it at all.
Because they wanted to get baby out by a certain day.
They wanted me to be in the right place when the baby was born so that they could get hold of the baby, check if the baby was okay, and then do what they needed to do with the baby, which obviously I wanted that as well, but I trusted that I could tell when I was starting to go into labour, and I would just immediately go to the hospital and I could have a birth which had started when my body was ready for it, and I felt like I would have a more positive experience if I'd gone into labour spontaneously. That's just my thought process and preference. I eventually agreed to an induction date at 39 weeks. She initially wanted me to come in at 38 weeks. We pushed it to 39 because I knew that I felt like I was going to go into labour before then. Because of my previous birth, I knew my body. I knew that I thought that typically I would go into labour earlier than term. So, and that's what happened. It was actually the next day. So I went away from Manchester, drove all the way home, and then went into labour that night. So I was 36 plus 5. So I was a tiny bit early, but
I'm so happy for you.
No.
because sorry to interrupt, but I feel like because you mentioned the word negotiations, and that already triggers a little bit of tension in me when I think of negotiation, and the fact that you have to sit and negotiate your terms for the induction. It's not that you're saying you're not going to come to hospital. It's just that you're saying, let's wait until my body is ready and then I will come directly to hospital, right? How did you feel? How did that make you feel having to go through that process? How did you manage to stay calm and in your body, like we said at the beginning, whilst also negotiating for a highly medicalized birth,
So I've thought about this a lot since the event because I felt like I was in an incredibly privileged position in the sense that I understood physiology of birth very, very deeply. I've studied it a lot. I understood the maternity system and the motivations for them wanting me to be induced. And yes, it was so that I was in the right place, but there's all sorts of different reasons why they like to induce women, and I knew what those were. But I also was very strong in my conviction. I felt very, very confident in my decision. I didn't question it at all. So I had the confidence to advocate for myself. But that's quite an unusual situation for a woman to be in that environment, because not everyone has studied physiology in depth. They've not studied the maternity system. The majority of people that I speak to don't like conflict and will fawn in the fight, flight, fawn in a situation where they're being pressured, and then look back on it and think, why didn't I push harder? So I felt like I was very self-assured in what I wanted to push for, but what I reflected back on was what would have happened if it was a woman in that situation who didn't have that background and didn't have that in-depth knowledge of the system and physiology of birth. Would they have been able to have that negotiation with the consultant and get the outcome that they wanted? And I question whether they would have done, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But it was a very difficult conversation. It was very long. We were talking for about an hour.
And you're already in such a vulnerable state, because you already know that as soon as your baby comes out, there might be a surgery. There's this fear element coming in, because maybe as birth workers, we help women deal with that fear and that anxiety and replace it with trust. But if you know that there's already a very high chance, that fear is much higher that you have to work with.
And even just the kind of power dynamic of the room that we were in, there was a consultant, an obstetrician consultant, a midwife who was clearly aligned with the perspective of the consultant. She wasn't there to advocate and support me at all. And then I was there with my husband, who he was there to support me, but he didn't have the knowledge that I had. And I was in a hospital that was far away from home. I was in a medical environment, which I didn't want to be in. You know, I thought I was having a home birth. And I'd already had a really difficult day because I'd had a tour of NICU because I knew that my baby was going to go into NICU. So that was incredibly stressful. I'd had a meeting with a lactation consultant in the hospital because I wanted to get some support with breastfeeding and expressing once the baby had been born. And she'd done a full breastfeeding trauma debrief with me from my first birth, which I wasn't really prepared for. It was amazing. It was so worthwhile. But I went into that meeting with the consultant incredibly vulnerable. And there was absolutely no consideration for me as the mother at all. It was all about how they can do their job.
How to make it easiest for them to control the situation and not leave any window for... It's not about your feelings and you and your baby bonding or anything like that. It's really about, this is our job and we need to fit you in to when it suits us. That's what I'm hearing. It sounds heavy to have to deal with at 30 plus weeks. You said 34, you found out 34.
Yeah. So this would have been, I would have been 36 plus 4 because it was the day before I gave birth. I obviously didn't know that at the time. It was right at the end of my pregnancy.
I'm just imagining, at 34 weeks, you're aiming for a home birth and then overnight everything changes. You have to do these negotiations. You end up agreeing for something. In the end, your body goes into, you start feeling the contractions at home. I can imagine you must have felt so happy.
Yeah.
That's what I imagine.
Yeah. Weirdly, once, obviously I was leading up to everything, I was really scared about what was going to happen because I was scared about how my baby was going to be and, was he going to be okay? But once I actually got into labor mode, I was actually weirdly calm. I was excited. All of my fears about what was going to happen once the baby arrived just completely left my head and I was just in the labor. So yeah, that was actually fine. I was really happy that I'd gone into labour myself and I was excited, and we got straight in the car and just drove straight to Manchester, and we got there in plenty of time, obviously. Yeah.
So I'm glad that you followed your instinct and you got there in plenty of time. So how did the birth go once you got to hospital? What happened then?
So, generally it was a positive birth. There were parts of it where I could kind of dwell on it and really latch onto and think that was wrong, that shouldn't have happened. But I don't think it's particularly healthy for me to do that. Some of the things that stand out were I'd gone in, my first birth was very quick. So I was prepared for my second birth to be quite quick. And my contractions by the time we got to hospital were 2 minutes apart. So I wasn't panicked by that. I felt like we would get to hospital on time. I could tell in my body when we were in the car that I wasn't going to give birth within the next couple of hours, but I felt like things were progressing well. I was in a good mood. And then as soon as we arrived at the hospital, got put into a room, and I was really, I think if I'd been left in that first room on my own with my husband, I would have given birth in there. But then I got moved into another room, consultant came in, NICU consultant came in, anaesthetist came in, I think the baby surgeon came in. All of these really stressful conversations were happening while I was in labour. And obviously
with you or among themselves, they were coming in while you're in labour, your contractions are 2 minutes apart, trying to talk to you about all these things.
Yeah, well, I was back in my head completely.
Absolutely. If you're talking to the anaesthetist and the surgeon,
then everyone was coming in to see, oh, hi, you're here. And I actually said at one point to the midwife, please just stop people coming in now. This is ridiculous. But by that point, my contractions had completely stopped. From that point, any sign of the birth progressing in a physiological sense had gone. Things started again once everything calmed down and I'd kind of stopped.
Did you manage to kick everybody out of the room?
Yeah. Got onto my ball and, I started contracting again. But because we were in hospital and the consultant kept bobbing in and kind of wanted to see me progressing quicker than I was. So they started the conversations about putting me onto the drip, which I declined. They asked me every half an hour and I kept declining it. I didn't want it. And after about 4 hours of being asked every half an hour, I just thought, I just said yes, because I just couldn't, what else could I do? You know, it was just relentless. So I went on to the hormone drip, and you know how they ramp it up, don't they? So at first it didn't do anything, and then, you know, eventually it got to the point where the contractions started to really speed up, and the pain was very, very intense, much more than I'd ever felt with my first birth. So then I opted to have an epidural, which I've thought about a lot beforehand, and that was one of the things that I had come to terms with. And I knew that if I was induced at any stage and I felt like the pain was too much, I was okay with having an epidural. So I felt absolutely fine about that decision. I wasn't coerced into it, or I didn't feel like it was out of my control. So I've gone through the experience of having an epidural procedure while contracting, which was very intense. I don't know how to describe it. It was horrendous. But then as soon as they'd inserted it and I kind of sat back up and changed position, it's like textbook. I just changed position and I could feel him crowning. I could feel him pushing down onto my cervix. And he was out within probably about 10 minutes. And they hadn't even put the medication in. So I'd gone through
the epidural medication, you mean?
Yeah, but I didn't.
That hadn't kicked in yet.
They didn't actually give it to me at all because they knew that he was crowning and he was going to come out. So I went through that whole procedure for nothing, really. And then he came out. So he was born vaginally, which I wanted, spontaneous onset of labour. The other thing that was at the top of my birth plan was immediate skin to skin as long as he was responsive. So I immediately I didn't let anyone touch him. I grabbed hold of him as quickly as I could, got him onto my chest because I could hear him crying. So I got that immediate skin to skin, which is just it was so important to me. And I'm so happy that I got that. And then they took him away and did the little test to see if they thought he needed the surgery, and they did. But then he was still lovely and responsive, and his APGAR scores were amazing. So they gave him back to me. So I got skin to skin again. And then they took him to NICU. The next thing at the top of my birth plan was I wanted to express within an hour of giving birth because I wanted to start my milk supply. So that happened as well because it was like in bold at the top of my birth plan. And then I had an amazing midwife who helped me with that. So there was lots of things about it that were absolutely not what I had imagined. And it was the complete opposite of what I wanted. But the things that I had really prioritized and really, really advocated hard for, I did get. So looking back on it, I do feel like it was an incredibly positive experience. But what it has made me do is question this message that I see a lot within the sort of birth antenatal education world, that we can almost advocate our way to a natural birth or a positive birth. And having gone through a medicalized route and seen how difficult it is for women to navigate a medicalized birth, I really question if that's a sensible message to be giving to women. And I don't know what the answer is, but I'm still working through that myself, knowing what is appropriate and how to support women, because I think it's really challenging to have a physiological birth in a medicalized environment. You know, unless you naturally give birth very, very quickly and people don't have time to get their hands on or engage your brain, I think it's really challenging.
I'm completely with you there, because I had an induction in hospital, then I had a home birth, and then I had twins. So I was high risk from the beginning just because they were twins, and I knew they had to be born in hospital, and they were born vaginally. It was a physiological twin birth. It was induced in a very medical setting. And I'm very curious as to how you prepare, or how would you prepare now, knowing what differences would you prepare if knowing that you're going to have a home birth, or knowing that you're going to have maybe a physiological, vaginal, or any kind of birth in a medicalized setting, because you have no idea how it's going to turn out, right?
Yeah.
So how did you prepare for that, and what would you have done differently in terms of the preparation?
Do you know what? It's a really good question, because I've not thought about that and no one's asked me, but I actually don't think I would have done anything differently. I think I'm really happy with the way that the birth went, because I've thought about a lot of those things beforehand. If I was to give birth again, I would have a home birth. Even though I've had this really challenging experience of having a poorly baby and needing additional medical support, providing obviously there was no signs of the baby being in any sort of danger, I would have a home birth again. I think personally, that's what's right for me. If I knew I had to go into hospital, I think one of the things that I worked with a doula who wasn't actually my birth doula, because I personally didn't want someone else at my birth, but she helped me with my birth prep. And she talked about putting your non-negotiables at the top of your birth plan. So it's not necessarily what kind of birth you want, it's the things that are the most important to you and how you want to feel in your birth. And that's what really helped me with highlighting those things like skin to skin, immediate expressing or breastfeeding if it wasn't possible for me, but immediate expressing, spontaneous onset of labor, so that, because I'd thought about those non-negotiables and they were at the top of the birth plan, it wasn't actually the specifics of where I gave birth or what I accepted, or it was a slightly bigger concept about what was important to me in birth. And I think that really, really helped, because when I reflect back and I saw that I got those things, it actually doesn't matter how the birth went. It was the non-negotiables that I managed to achieve.
Because it's really not what happens, right? When we talk about positive birth, for me, and from what you're saying, it's not about what happens at birth. It's really how you feel about it, how you're made to feel about it, and how then consequently you feel about it. Because what you're saying now is you told this birth story with a smile on your face, which is really beautiful to watch, because, you go back to it. It's not the birth you wanted, in the sense that it wasn't a home birth, and nobody wants to have to, think of their baby going into NICU straight after birth. It's just, but you're still saying it with a smile.
Yeah.
And you're going back to it.
Yeah, completely. And I did feel supported, respected. I don't know if it's hard, because I think because I went into that environment and I was incredibly clear about what I wanted, and I was very vocal about it, and I was very strong and assertive, and it was clear to anyone who came in any area around me that I wasn't gonna compromise. I don't know whether that impacted how I was treated, because I did feel like I was listened to, I was respected, and maybe that was because of the energy that I was giving off. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe everyone feels like that, but I do feel like it was a positive experience, and I am sad that I probably will never experience a home birth, because I don't think I'll have another baby now. So I do feel sad about that.
I'm truly happy that you made them. It sounds like you made the most out of the situation and the preparation. And it sounds like all that preparation that you put in place for that home birth paid off, in the sense that you did have that birth that you want in a different environment that you wanted, but you did have your non-negotiables. And can you tell us a little bit about what happens after then? Because I mean, we talk about the importance of the fourth trimester. The first trimester baby is born is really the fourth trimester, the first trimester of mom in postpartum. How do you even navigate that, knowing that you won't be home?
Yeah. So with my second pregnancy, I put a lot of thought into the postnatal period and the fourth trimester. And I had done a whole session with my doula on postnatal preparation, because I felt like I hadn't done enough with my first birth. And then we got the news that he was going to need surgery. And so I suddenly started thinking about, how am I going to establish breastfeeding if my baby's not on me? How am I going to, make sure we've got that bond? How am I going to, I'd had this really clear visualization in my head of, after I'd given birth at home, I was led on the sofa and I was eating a bacon sandwich. And it was really weird. It was like that being taken away from me, I felt really sad about, because I was really looking forward to it. I could taste it. So it was weird. And we were in NICU for 3 months. 3 months. So it was my entire fourth trimester. We were in NICU. And there's nothing you can say to make it feel better than it was. I mean, it was awful. Any time you have a poorly child, it's horrendous. And it was really hard, and by far, the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and probably will ever have to go through in my life. But there were some incredibly bright moments in that time. The support that we had and the support that we felt from the medical professionals, from our family and friends. You never feel support like it. It was so incredibly, I felt so incredibly lucky that we had access to all of that care, that there was actually something that could be done to save the baby, because basically the condition that he's got is his esophagus, so his food pipe, was attached to his trachea, so his windpipe, and normally they are completely separate. So they had to detach the esophagus from the abnormal connection to the windpipe and then reattach the two bits of esophagus together. So there was quite a lot of repair to do, because he had some damage to his windpipe from the surgery. So he's still got some breathing issues now, which he should grow out of. And then the repair with the esophagus had to, properly heal before he could even think about feeding orally. But then again, there's some damage to the esophagus, so it doesn't function as it should.
This was detected while you were pregnant.
Yes.
You just want to stop and say, I'm so grateful for technology in these cases.
Exactly. And one part of the story that I haven't mentioned, which I think we could do a whole podcast on, is I was offered additional scans towards the end of my pregnancy for one little blood test that I had. And I nearly declined the scans because I was very, pro-physiology, anti-intervention, I guess. I just wanted to reduce any chance of me being told that I needed to go to hospital. So I nearly didn't go, but I did go for some reason. I went for this scan, and that's where they detected the problem. So again, that just completely threw into question all of my beliefs and, philosophy around birth, and like really challenged me.
Would this have been detected after he would have been born?
Yeah. So he would. So I would have had the home birth probably, and then when he's tried to start feeding, he would have been choking on the milk, because the milk would have been going into his windpipe probably, and it would have been an emergency, and he would have had to be transferred from my house to Manchester, which is not near where I live. Mm. It would have been horrific. Okay. So so he went. So they detected it. They could tell straight away, because they just try and pass a tube down through the nose to see if they can get it down into the stomach. And because they couldn't get it into the stomach, they thought, he's got what we think he's got. So the fact that they could identify the condition, they could treat it, they have specialists there who treat that, even though it's incredibly rare. There's quite a few babies there at any one time with that condition, because all the babies in the north of England go to that hospital to have it treated. And the recovery wasn't straightforward, not linear at all. You think you have the operation and then you kind of get better and go home, but it wasn't like that at all. We were nearly going home after 4 weeks, and then he had a massive setback. He was back on a ventilator, moved back into ICU, and then we were there for another 2 months. He was moved into HDU, and we spent the rest of the time in HDU until we got discharged. So the whole of the 4th trimester was in hospital.
How did you manage it with your older child?
In NICU, you can't sleep next to your child, which again, it's just the thought of leaving your child is hard anyway, but your newborn baby who's supposed to be on you, they need you, don't they? So you have to leave. But there's an incredible charity called Ronald McDonald House, which has this accommodation next to all the big children's hospitals. And you can go and stay there. And it's literally next door. I mean, you probably walked about 10 steps from the children's hospital to the Ronald McDonald. So we stayed there for 3 months, and I'm so grateful for them. And my daughter could stay there as well. She was 4 at the time, and just before she started school. So it was really hard, because I was away from home most of the time because I was expressing. So I just needed to be at the hospital the whole time. My husband was at home with my daughter a lot, but we brought her in as much as we possibly could. We explained everything to her. We got her really involved in all of his care. Because she was 4, she was able to do a lot of the things and understand things. She would do, she'd do the tube feeds. She'd it was so cute. She'd come into the room and she'd have washed all her hands because she knew the processes. And then she'd get up onto the chair. She'd open the incubator doors and she'd have her hands in and she'd be talking to him. And she was so confident, and she did not see it as a bad thing at all. For her, it was just, this is Benjamin, this is my brother. There was no negativity. I know, honestly, it was incredible. She just lifted the mood whenever she came in, and I was so incredibly grateful for having another child when we were going through that, because it also forces you to detach and pull out of what's going on, and because you have to think about your other child as well. And I think if it's your first child, it's your only child, your whole world is that NICU. But because you have to detach from it to think about your other child, it does force you to just come back into the real world a bit. And I was incredibly grateful for that, even though logistically it was harder because we had to think about
Of course,
her.
and you're far from home as well, which adds a level of
But the
stress.
thing about Ronald McDonald was, because she could stay, particularly at the weekend, my husband and her would come to stay at Ronald McDonald, and she would sleep in the room with us, and she loved that. And we'd made the room really comfortable, and we brought all our things from home and coffee machines and all that sort of stuff. And there was a really good playroom there, so she loved that. And because we were there for such a long time, we'd figured out activities in the local area that she liked doing. So there was a really good swimming pool, there was a really good climbing centre. So she adapted.
She
loved it.
Children just adapt the way that we
Yeah.
can't even imagine adapting, right?
Yeah. And then recently we've been readmitted into Manchester Hospital for 3 weeks, just for some ongoing things that he's got going on. And so we said to her, you know, oh, we've got to go back to Manchester. But she was happy. She was happy about it because she has all really positive memories about it, which I'm so pleased about, because obviously it was incredibly traumatic for us. But she just didn't know any different. She's amazing. Yeah, I'm so glad that we had her through it all.
And I can imagine maybe that 4th trimester, she helped you regulate your hormones a little bit and kind of give you that oxytocin peak that, you know, like you're saying, at night you could cuddle with her. I know you couldn't cuddle with your son, but at least you could cuddle with her, and that still it fuels you, doesn't it?
Definitely. And all of the NICU nurses are really well trained to encourage skin to skin with your baby. I mean, I was there all the time in daytime hours, but they would always say, even if they were in really intense, ICU, where they had all the wires and the lines and the breathing support, and there was so much going on, they would always make the effort to help you get the baby out and put the baby on you, and encouraged you to have that skin to skin or hold them. It was never too much trouble. They were really well trained on breastfeeding support and expressing. They would always make the time to get any equipment that you needed or help you sterilize your pumping parts and things like that. So they do very much encourage that bonding and try and make it as easy as possible for you. And that's a big part of their job, which I totally underestimated. I didn't understand that was part of their job. We have some incredible nurses, and I'm so grateful to them.
And on the breastfeeding topic, what advice do you have to any moms out there who are in this situation? Their babies are going to NICU. I know it happens a lot with twins. I personally have connections with a few people who've had this. They want to breastfeed, they're expressing, they don't know how long it's going to go on for, because you don't really know when your baby's going to come out. And I know it's not ideal having to express from day one. What advice do you have for other moms who are going through this?
It is so difficult, and breastfeeding and feeding generally is just such an emotive topic. Personally, I was absolutely adamant that I wanted to exclusively breastfeed Benjamin before I knew he was going to be poorly, because I'd had quite a tricky breastfeeding experience with my first. So I'd done loads of preparation to try and make sure that I had a better experience second time round. And then I was told that he had an issue with, feeding, swallowing, and it was unlikely that he was ever going to breastfeed. So that was another thing that I had to get my head around in that 2 weeks. I met with this feeding support midwife in Manchester. I had to actually sort of seek her out myself, which is a bit disappointing. I wasn't offered that when we were transferred to Manchester, but I did manage to find her, and she just stands out as one of the most incredible people through the whole process, and she gave me all this amazing advice. So express within an hour of giving birth, hand express. So that would be my number one tip. And the reason that's so important is because there's so much going on after birth and time just evaporates. So whether you've just had, quite a straightforward birth and there's not actually that much to do, maybe birth the placenta, you might not need any stitches, it's still, the time just flies, and it could quite easily go by and 3 hours have gone, and then you think, oh, I have not expressed. So just make sure that as soon as the baby's out, it's like you need to start thinking about when you're going to do this hand expressing. So get hand expressing, and then just hand express as regularly as you can for the first few days. and they have really good quality pumps in hospital. So start to pump as soon as there's a bit more volume coming through. Try and keep the supply up. I was pumping religiously every 3 hours, day and night, to keep my supply up. They give you lots of tips like the bonding squares, which is like a knitted square, which they give you 2, and one you keep in your bra and the other one is in the baby's incubator, and then you swap them.
So they have your
So
smell.
I think the smell, yeah. So we did that, and I've still got the bonding squares, which is lovely. And then anytime you can get skin to skin, do it. It was quite tricky for me because he had the surgery and then he had to be paralyzed for 5 days to make sure that the repair wasn't compromised. I couldn't have skin to skin until he was nearly a week old, but I had the initial skin to skin at the birth, which is why it was so important to me to have it. But yeah, skin to skin. And it's just going back to the basics of just be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. When you're in NICU, everyone's expressing, and you look over and you see a woman who's got the milk bottles attached to the pump, and it fills up within 5 minutes, and she's having to change the bottle and it fills up again. I was looking at her thinking,
I only have 5 mils and she's got 150.
And I've been sat here for half an hour and I've got the tiniest amount of milk. But you don't compare yourself to anyone else. It's your body. And weirdly, by the time I'd got into a rhythm and he was on full feeds, and this was quite a way down the line, but I was expressing the exact amount to the millimeter that he needed for his 3-hourly feeds. My body knew. And then one time the doctor came around and said, he's put on a bit of weight. Let's increase his feeds to this amount of milliliters. On my next expressing session, I expressed the perfect amount of milk, even though I'd been expressing the same volume for like 3 weeks. So your body's incredible.
That's so beautiful to hear.
Even though it's like completely artificial situation and you getting the milk out not in a natural way at all, your body still knows what your baby needs. It's amazing.
I remember with my twins, I had to express and I was getting like 5, 10, 15 mils. And I just felt like, oh my God. And you see on Instagram, women posting pictures of full milk bottles and freezing it. And I'm thinking, what is going on? But one, I want to reiterate what you said. Your body synchronizes with your baby. 2, you said every 3 hours, day and night. That is exhausting. So I think everybody should be aware of that. And that's where extra care for the mother, be extra kind to yourself, is even more important, because it is a tremendous job to be doing it every 3 hours, whether you are pumping, expressing, or whether you're feeding your baby. It's still every 3 hours. What was the timescale for you? You said it took a while for it to get established. Can you paint us a picture of what that means?
Okay, so I had a bit of an unusual situation because he wasn't feeding at all for the first week or so because he'd had this operation on his digestive system. So I had to try and get my milk established when I didn't have baby in skin to skin. The baby actually wasn't feeding, so I wasn't kind of visually seeing the milk going into his body. I was in hospital, I was in NICU, I was expressing, not breast. Like, it was, all the odds were against me basically. But I did all of the things that I was told to do, and my colostrum came. Then the 3rd day, textbook, milk came in. I was extremely engorged. I was sat in one of the NICU bedrooms with one of the breastfeeding support workers, and we were just looking at each other. We tried everything to try and get, release some of this milk or get some of the engorgement down. And she was at a loss as well. She said, I've never seen anything like it. And I just felt like I felt like I needed to borrow someone's baby to latch on and get the milk. It's so weird. Like, that's what I needed.
Like, your body was saying, I need a baby to take this out.
I honestly would, if there was a baby there, and the mother would have let me do it, which they probably wouldn't have done. But if I would have just latched a baby onto me, because it was just ridiculous. But the thing that worked was cabbage leaves. So I was sat in NICU in this highly medicalized environment, all the technology in the world, with 2 cabbage leaves over my breasts.
That's so funny.
On, like, topless as well. Like, at this point I didn't care because you just express in the middle of the room and like everyone's coming in and out. I didn't care, and I was just sat reclined on this chair trying to relax because everyone was telling me to relax, and I had these 2 cabbage leaves. I've got a picture of it actually. It's quite funny. Anyway, so then my milk came in, and I wasn't getting very much. I can't remember how many mils, but it was probably like 10 mils every session. And like you said, it was relentless. Every 3 hours from the start of your last session, and I was pumping for half an hour at a time, and you have to sterilize your equipment before you start. So actually, you only get a couple of hours break in between, and you have to eat, you have to go to the toilet, you have to have a little walk around, get some fresh air. And I was doing all of the baby's cares and like helping with feeds. And so it's absolutely relentless, but you feel, it's so easy to feel helpless in there because so much of the control is taken away from you. So you actually want to feel like you're doing something productive. So you're just running off that, you know, I want to say adrenaline, but it's all the cocktails of hormones that you feel postnatally. Your body's incredible helping you get through that period. And I could tell the difference between me and my husband. I was absolutely just, you know, relentlessly had energy. You know, I actually looked really good. You know, when I look at pictures of myself, I don't look tired. I've got like that post-birth glow, you know, all that whole week, that whole first week. And my husband was absolutely on his knees because he was just so tired because he didn't have any of the birth stuff that happened. So he was just exhausted. And I was, you know, I was like really determined,
like mum on fire,
get on top of this. Like, I need to nail it. So yeah, it was a weird experience, but you just rise to the challenge, don't you? You know, I know a lot of people were kind of looking at us and just thinking, I don't know how they're doing this, but you just have to do it. And there's no option. You just have to rise to the challenge.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for sharing that story. It's going to be incredibly helpful for anybody whose babies are currently in NICU or have the chance to go into NICU, and to know that they're not alone.
What I would say about NICU is it's obviously the last thing you want to happen when you have a baby. But 1 in 7 babies go into NICU. So it's actually more common than we think. So I don't think it's irresponsible to talk to women about NICU antenatally, just to have a little consideration for what might happen if the baby does have to go into NICU. And the majority of the time, they go in there for a few hours, maybe 24 hours max, which feels like a long time. There are things you can do to optimize that time, encourage breastfeeding to become established if that's important to you, or just encourage that bonding, whatever it is. We probably need to talk about it a bit more with women, because 1 in 7 is quite common, isn't it?
One of my twins went into neonatal care for the first night, and I was devastated. I had never expected it because the first baby came out and he was fine. Second baby came out, we need to do this check, you know, and it cascades and you're like, what? This can't be happening. It just can't be happening. Like, so I think you're completely right. I think it's important to talk about it. It's important to share and to be kind to yourself.
The other thing to say about it is it's really hard. I would never play it down to anyone, whether they have been in there for a few hours or whether they've been in there for months. You know, and even when you just said that to me, my heart is like, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, because it's really, really difficult. But you will be okay. You will get through it. And you will come out of that. And it's hard, but you'll get through it. I think it's important to talk about. And I think we can talk about it in a way that's not scaring women, particularly when they're pregnant. One of the things that I battled with a lot was, I obviously work a lot with pregnant and postnatal women, and I've got a community on social media. And a lot of the women that follow me and engage with me and come to my classes are pregnant, obviously. And they all knew that I was pregnant. And then I just went silent. And I was so aware that they were thinking, has something happened? Is she okay? Is the baby okay? And I really felt nervous about sharing the fact that we were in NICU, because I didn't want to scare them, because some of the stuff, you know, some of the pictures and things were quite scary, really. And actually, it's like what we were saying about children before, you know, they're so resilient. And actually, everyone, when I did start to share things later down the line, I did it in the form of a blog, and it was very considered the way that I put the information out there. But everyone was incredible, and of course they could cope with it, because people are amazing and they're so resilient. And they really liked that I was honest about it all and shared like the photographs, really, not graphic, but just honest photographs. So yeah, I think we do wrap people up in cotton wool, I think, sometimes, and actually it's not the right thing to do.
Especially during pregnancy, there's this like, there is this pregnancy bubble, which is a beautiful bubble to be in. We don't want to burst that bubble, but we do have to make them aware that these things can happen. It's not about the actual things that do happen. It's how we approach them, right? How we feel about them, our attitude towards it. And I guess that's where a yoga practice comes in a way, you know, to kind of make it a full circle and go back to yoga. So let's finish on that. How has your approach to teaching pregnancy yoga, what does it look like now to include all routes for pregnancy and all routes for birth and all routes for post-birth?
It's so different. I'm so passionate about offering my classes for all types of birth. There is no right way to give birth. There's no perfect way to give birth. I think women who are preparing for a home birth and women who are preparing for a C-section or a more medicalized birth and everything in between deserve the same amount of support, preparation. There shouldn't be any judgment. It is what is right for you and your baby. And obviously, if there's someone in my class who expresses that they're planning for a home birth, I will love chatting to them about a home birth. I get really excited for them. If they have the home birth, I love talking to them about what it was like. And don't get me wrong, that is still there. But equally, you know, I've had a student recently who is a doctor and she has worked on the neonatal unit. And some of the stuff that she's seen has been very difficult for her to get out of her head. So she opted for an elective C-section. And she had the C-section a couple of weeks ago. And she sent me a photograph yesterday, actually, of her on the table with the baby skin to skin, and her husband was there. And the smile on their face was incredible. And I was just so, so happy for her that she achieved what she wanted. And it was her choice and it was on her terms. And I honestly think, and this, you know, it's a big thing to admit, but I think before any of this happened to me, I think there would have been a part of me that judged her a little bit for that. And now I'm just completely and utterly supportive of what is right for the woman and what her choice is. So yeah, I think if you have a look at my Instagram page, you can see like the shift in the messaging that I put out there, from probably pro physiology to pro just you do what's right for you and your family.
I completely understand that. I think the twins also just shifted the way I see pregnancy, the way I see birth, the way I see what we mean about family, everything. And I think that's how we evolve as teachers. And that's the right thing to do, right? Because we also teach from a place of experience. Yeah. And that's where your own wisdom comes in. And I'm so happy. I'm not happy that you had to go through that. I'm happy that you're able to incorporate that and then reflect it in your teachings and help your students.
I feel like that. I feel, obviously, I'm not, I didn't want to go through that. And I didn't want Benjamin to go through any of that. And I never would wish it upon anyone. Or if I could take all that pain away from him, obviously I would. But I just think everything is a lesson. And I am grateful for that lesson, because it's not just taught me about how I teach my yoga class. It's taught me about life, family, priorities, what is going on in the world. I am grateful for what happened. And I think going back to what you were saying about yoga is the thing that's got me through it. And the philosophy behind yoga and the self-reflective practice, it's given me the strength to get through it. No question. It's been the thing that got me through, for sure.
Thank you. And I mean, when you say yoga got you through it, I can imagine you're not doing sun salutations there in NICU, like cabbage leaves on your boobs. It's what we talk about yoga. Like it's the essence of it, right? It's the philosophy. It's a way of life. It's not the poses that you do. I'm so grateful that you have that practice for yourself as well.
Thank you.
Katie, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can reach you?
So I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @thepregnancyyogateacher, and my website is www.thepregnancyyogateacher.co.uk. I teach in person in my local area in Lancashire, in the northwest of England, but I also have a weekly online pregnancy class, which is live on Zoom, and a weekly online postnatal class. So people join from all over the world. You're very welcome to join one of my classes.
Okay, and if anybody wants to reach out to you about NICU or finding support or community, can they do that as well?
Definitely. You can message me on Instagram. You can contact me through the website. I'm really happy to talk to anyone about anything like that. I'd love to support anyone who's going through any challenging time.